Have you ever been to like a Renaissance fair or medieval times and seen two guys in full armor with weapons just going at it? Now, just imagine if those two guys were actually fighting. Well, here's the good news. You don't have to imagine it, because this exists.
Medieval sword fighting.
There's nothing choreographed around this. This is straight up two guys fighting in armor.
We have an historical fencing heavyweight fight.
If one of those swords comes anywhere near him, he doesn't look very well protected.
Probably the wildest thing I've ever seen take place at an MMA, or take place at an MMA event.
So what you just saw was a real fight from a real competitive bout. This is a fully organized, fully sanctioned combat sports event where grown men don full armor, shields, and even swords and step into a ring to fight each other. There are rings, there are ring walks, there are referees, there are cornermen, there are a set of governing rules to the sport. It's called M-1 Medieval, and it's all organized by Russian mixed martial arts promoter M-1 Global. Now, M-1 Global itself, at first glance anyway, seems like a pretty normal, legitimate organization. They organize combat events across the CIS region, and in 2008, they even signed a deal with the UFC to become a kind of Russian farm league. So how the hell did they wind up putting medieval knight cosplayers together in a ring and calling it a fight? Well, M-1 Medieval first debuted as a kind of sideshow event in 2014 at M-1 Global's M-1 Challenge 50. And apparently, fans liked that so much that M-1 decided to continue producing medieval combat events, even considering creating an entire medieval knight combat league with its own events. Now, I couldn't find a clear official rule set for M-1 Medieval events, but they don't seem that complicated. The weapons are obviously blunted, and according to an interview on MMAfighting.com, you can't use headbutts or submission holds, but you can punch, kick, and grapple all you like. But from what I've seen, grappling isn't exactly the meta when it comes to M-1 Medieval. A lot of shield bashes though. The fights physically take place in what M-1 calls a rage, which is a cross between a ring and a cage. Get it? Rage. Yeah. And at a glance, that is one of the strangest things about this entire sport. You've got two men, head to toe in plate armor, with swords and shields, and they're in a modern day combat ring. It's just strange. Which brings me to the second most absurd thing about M-1 Medieval, the referee, who, by the way, is just a normal dude in a t-shirt who could probably die if he had to get between these two fighters in a heated moment. At the very least, he could lose a few teeth to an errant shield bash. I mean, think about it. These guys are wearing full helmets. They probably have very little peripheral vision. What if somebody takes a big sword swing and the ref happens to be standing right next to them? That's a down ref.
He might be the bravest man in that ring right now.
I'm sure the announcer's quick enough to get out of there. You see him run away there.
And believe it or not, M-1 Medieval is actually the tip of the iceberg. Outside of the whole combat sport thing, people are really into this. There are whole scenes out there dedicated to studying and reenacting medieval martial arts, like the International Medieval Combat Federation, who apparently hold 5v5 international tournaments.
Big Dave, let's just remind the audience that these fights that we are watching right now are for a place in the quarter-finals.
Oh! A great takedown by winner! 4 English fighters still up to 2 Germans.
The still can continue.
It will continue. Oh! Beckers!
It's 4 on 2, Dave.
And she's getting chopped.
It's 4 on 2.
How much can he take this man?
That is so
impressive.
They have their own subreddits, their own meetups, and as you saw, their own competitive events. Now, from what I've seen, some of these more hardcore medieval combat enthusiasts have mixed feelings when it comes to M-1 Medieval, specifically regarding the historical accuracy of their events.
Okay, so I think it's about time. Quite a lot of people have asked me about this. Like, people have been sending me links to these fights, these medieval, because it's incredible. We can safely say that modern Olympic foil fencing is actually closer to the way knights actually fought than this thing.
But I mean, my 2 cents is it's clearly not the point of M-1 Medieval. It's obviously just a weird, fun sideshow to traditional combat sports that frankly is kind of awesome. Now, back around 2015, there was actually a lot of press and hype around M-1 Medieval. At that time, the president of M-1 Global had come out in interviews and spoke about the popularity of the events and talked about wanting to do an entire night fighting league. And individual night fight bouts did continue to happen over the next few years. But since about 2018, we haven't really heard all that much from M-1 Medieval. One of the latest communications I found was a Facebook post from 2020 talking about how M-1 Medieval were looking for sponsors and commercial partners to help put on their next series of fights. But it's actually not 100% clear to me whether or not this Facebook page was even an official outlet of M-1 Global. Now, that being said, the M-1 Global official website does still have an active listing for their medieval division. Now, there's very little content on that page other than blank profile pictures and win-loss records, but the fact that it even exists at least tells us that M-1 Global haven't completely given up on night fights just yet. If you're really into these weird fringe combat sports stories, check out my video on X-Arm, the bizarre hybrid of arm wrestling and MMA created by one of the guys behind the UFC.